Jar Jar Binks is one of the most mocked characters in Star Wars. Appearing to be clumsy whenever possible, Jar Jar's only ever protection is his plot armor. But what if that was not his only armor? What if he was a Force user? What if he was a Sith Lord? As you will see, a lot will change. We're going to have to break Darth Bane's rule of two here, as Sidious is not aware of Darth Jar Jar, having masked his Force presence from everyone. The initial events on Naboo would be similar, with Qui-Gon saving Jar Jar from being run over by MTT, and then visiting Boss Nass. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan convince Boss Nass to allow Jar Jar to guide them to the surface of Naboo, where they rescue Queen Amidala and attempt to fly to Coruscant, before stopping on Tatooine to repair their hyperdrive. It is in Tatooine, however, where events differ. Jar Jar up to this point had been intrigued by the two Jedi, and upon landing on Tatooine, felt a tremor in the Force. This, he realised, was his time to emerge and begin to take control of the galaxy. Whilst Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan went to inspect the hyperdrive, Jar Jar would athletically front flip from the ship onto the sandy surface. Enhancing his speed with the Force, Jar Jar would sprint away towards the mysterious presence. Coming upon Watto's workshop, he would lay his eyes upon this mysterious presence. It was a young boy named Anakin Skywalker. Jar Jar decided to slip back into clumsy mode, and humoured Anakin with an array of acrobatics and goofy faces, using his trademark tongue. Anakin would be kind enough to lead him to his home, where Jar Jar would meet C-3PO and Shmi Skywalker, Anakin's mother. At this point, Qui-Gon, Padme Amidala, and R2-D2 would encounter Watto, not suspicious of Jar Jar's disappearance, whom they thought was off on one of his nonsensical adventures. Watto and Qui-Gon would negotiate their deal, but would come to a stop when Qui-Gon realised Republic credits won't do fine. Sensing no other alternative, Qui-Gon uses the Force and seizes Watto by the throat, coercing him into giving the parts for the hyperdrive. Watto reluctantly gave in, raising one of his gnarly fingers to point towards a part at the back of the yard. Qui-Gon would let go of Watto, whom would fall to the floor, clutching on his throat, and Qui-Gon would force grab the part, leaving Watto's workshop with a horrified Padme and an intrigued R2-D2. With another one of Tatooine's sandstorms looming, the trio would duck into a nearby shelter. Little did they know they had stumbled upon Anakin Skywalker's home. Jar Jar, who had been distracted by the nearly completed C-3PO, cursed himself for not being able to detect Qui-Gon coming to Anakin's home. Clearly, his skills were still rusty. Anakin would meet Padme for the first time, and he would again ask if she was an angel from the moons of Yago, annoying Jar Jar, whom had been attempting to subtly sway Anakin to the dark side of the Force. The group eventually left the modest home, without Shmi, as she was still tied to Tatooine due to her enslavement. Darth Maul would not fight Qui-Gon, as remember in this scenario, the pod race had not taken place yet, hence he would be too late. The group would fly back to Coruscant with Qui-Gon requesting to train Anakin, but the Council would not know about the Maul and the Sith, as Qui-Gon had not encountered him. Meanwhile, Jar Jar would accompany Queen Amidala to the Senate, now sensing a strong presence in the dark side of the Force. Entering their booth, Jar Jar would pose as a guard, when suddenly he felt a surge of hatred emanating from behind him, as Palpatine entered the booth. Jar Jar internally chuckled at Palpatine's attempt to mask his Force presence. It may have worked on the feeble Jedi, but it would not work on the true Sith Lord. After this encounter, Jar Jar would continue to track Palpatine's movements, sharpening his Force abilities and lightsaber skills, as well as continuing to solidify the links between Queen Amidala and the Gungans. Jar Jar would eventually track Palpatine to the galaxy's Opera House, and attend a Mon Calamari performance, then to Darth Plagueis' penthouse, where Palpatine and his master would retire for the evening. Being careful not to be detected, Jar Jar would jump from building to building in Coruscant's Monument Plaza, moving so quickly that to the naked eye he would be a mere blur. He would eventually land upon the roof of Plagueis' penthouse suite, and peering through a rooftop window, he would spot Plagueis beginning to waver from that alcohol Palpatine had encouraged him to drink. Sensing Palpatine was to strike at any moment, Jar Jar would find a weak spot in the security of Plagueis' home, swiftly jumping down from the rooftop and kicking the 2 guards standing outside the back door of his house in their heads, crushing their skulls instantly. Although the door was secure, a small crevice above it was open, and Jar Jar, using his flexibility, soundlessly flipped through the crevice. He was greeted with a stunning bright light, as Palpatine unleashed torrents of Force lightning upon his master, who was writhing in pain. Plagueis' body would finally lay limp, as Palpatine would declare himself to be the Lord of the Sith. With one final sinister gaze at his fallen master, Palpatine would turn around to lay his eyes upon a terrible sight, as Jar Jar stood proudly, with his cloak off, yellow teeth grinning, and his crimson red blade ignited, sparking in the darkness of Plagueis' room. Palpatine smirked as he unsheathed his own crimson red blade. This was the duel for the galaxy. Sidious would attempt to plunge his lightsaber through the chest of Jar Jar, but Jar Jar would use his immense flexibility to sidestep the attack, aiming a jab into the side of Sidious, which would be blocked. As they continued to duel, Sidious failed to notice a pattern in Jar Jar's combat style, as if it were all based on instinct. He had to try something different. Separating himself from Jar Jar with a well-calculated force push, Sidious extended his hand and unleashed a wave of force lightning at Jar Jar, but to his surprise, he was being countered. Jar Jar stood with a hand outstretched, repelling Sidious's force lightning easily, and forcing him back. Sidious is furious at seeing his force abilities being matched, and suddenly unleashes a force storm, collapsing the ceiling of Plagueis' apartment and allowing Sidious to escape. As Jar Jar stood in the rubble, he knew he would see Sidious again. Meanwhile, on Naboo, the same events occur, with Qui-Gon falling at the hands of Maul and Anakin destroying the droid control ship. Palpatine would still be at the celebrations on Naboo, as he had healed from his injuries sustained in his fight with Jar Jar. There is, however, a slight change in the conversation between Mace Windu and Yoda at Qui-Gon's funeral. Whereas in canon they agree that there is always a Sith Master and an apprentice, in this scenario, Yoda senses something different, and perhaps the rule of 2 had been broken. This required an investigation. After Qui-Gon's funeral, Yoda headed straight to the Sith planet of Korriban, seeking the ghost of Darth Bane, the creator of the Sith rule of 2. Yoda could feel the darkness in the air. Any lesser Jedi would be overwhelmed by the power of the dark energy. Moving through the network of tombs and cliffs, Yoda found his way to the tomb of Darth Bane. Opening the tomb with the Force, out emerged the ghost of Darth Bane. Yoda had expected a fearsome tower of evil, but instead, he was staring at a more pensive creature. Bane reveals that he too had sensed a shift in the Force, and the mysterious Sith Lord they had been looking for was not the only main threat to the Jedi, rather it was another mysterious being. With Bane unable to provide more information, Yoda leaves Korriban, confused that even the Sith did not know what was occurring. Moving forward to events in the Attack of the Clones, Jar Jar continues to assume his role as Padme's representative, which was in fact designated to him by Palpatine himself, taking over from her duties when she is away, all the while keeping an eye on Palpatine and Dooku. In particular, he's kept an eye on the creation of the clone army, designed to serve the Republic. Jar Jar knows Sidious's game. With Padme now on a break to Naboo with Anakin Skywalker, Jar Jar senses this is an opportunity to gain another advantage on Palpatine. Not only did he want to see him fall, but he wanted a complete humiliation. Jar Jar does the same as in canon, except using his immense force abilities, Jar Jar waves his hands and mind tricks the senators into diverting all the power to create a grand army for the Republic towards him. With the senators all in agreement, Palpatine cannot argue without exposing himself as the Sith Lord. He could only stand there with gritted teeth at the Gungan, who looked similar to the Force user he had fought in Plagueis' apartment. Little did he know, he was being outfoxed. As we move on to the events in the Clone Wars, there are some small changes, as Jar Jar is less clumsy than in canon, and also assists the Jedi where possible to disrupt the plans of Sidious. Jar Jar knew that Sidious was staging the whole war, so the Jedi would put too much trust in the clones, but nevertheless, knew he needed to stay sharp were he to become the true Sith Lord. Eventually, Jar Jar ventured back to his home planet of Naboo, sensing the Gungans were in trouble. Although he was a Sith, Jar Jar still sensed the need to protect his people. Getting off his small starship, he sees the towering figure of General Grievous attacking the Gungans. Jar Jar smirked as he removed his hood. This was the start of the fall of Sidious. Darth Jar Jar unsheathed his red lightsaber concealed in a special apartment in his robes, and moved towards Grievous at a blistering speed. Grievous was still fending off the Gungans with his blades, and failed to notice Jar Jar until it was too late, as the red lightsaber struck through his chest. As the Gungans were celebrating the death of Grievous, Jar Jar used his lightsaber to surgically remove Grievous's head, and putting it in a bag, moved on to the next part of his plan. A fine addition to my collection, thought Jar Jar to himself, allowing a sly grin to grow on his face. Using the intelligence he had collected over the past decade, Jar Jar concluded that Geonosis was the place to be next. Whilst the activity on Geonosis had somewhat subsided, Jar Jar knew that the Sith liked to make visits to the planet. Landing on the planet, he slings his bag over his head, and swiftly moves towards the Force signature he recognizes as Dooku. Entering a small network of caves, Jar Jar comes across a large room where Dooku is meeting with Separatist leaders. Hiding behind a small wall, Jar Jar removes Grievous's head from his bag, and using the Force, levitates the head onto the table of Dooku. The Separatist leaders gasp at the head of Grievous, but Dooku's eyes are now full of Sith yellow. Leaving the room, Dooku activates his comlink, hoping the head was merely a decoy, but he was met with static noise. Suddenly, the comlink is tugged away from him by the Force, as there stood Jar Jar, ready for another duel. Dooku unclipped his curved-tilted lightsaber from his belt, and the duel began. Without the element of surprise Jar Jar used against Grievous, Jar Jar knew he would have to defeat Dooku in a straight fight. Nevertheless, this was Jar Jar Binks, the one who had brought chaos within the Sith just by his mere existence. Blocking each one of Dooku's precise Makashi strikes with a blur, Jar Jar would separate himself from Dooku, attempting to lure Dooku into using Force Lightning. Dooku refused, having heard of Jar Jar's powers in the Force from his master. Jar Jar, however, was expecting this, and used a small Force shock at Dooku, which he would easily block. With Dooku slightly distracted, Jar Jar used the ground beneath Dooku to ignite a Sith barrage, stunning the Sith Lord with lightning bolts. With Dooku stunned, Jar Jar dragged Dooku into the room of scared Separatists, and like Grievous, cleanly decapitated the head of the fallen Jedi. Leaving wordlessly, Jar Jar sped off to Coruscant, juggling the heads of Grievous and Dooku in his hands. Meanwhile, Palpatine is in his office, having a discussion with the feeble Jedi. Suddenly, Palpatine felt a shockwave in the Force with the fall of Dooku, and knew his plan would be activated soon enough. Jar Jar landed in Coruscant smoothly, and rushed off to Palpatine's office, seeing the Sith Lord conversing with several Jedi. Dismissing Palpatine's guards in silence, Jar Jar entered the office, as Palpatine raised his head to meet the Gungan. A surprised Palpatine called for an end to the meeting with the Jedi, and requested to talk to Jar Jar alone, confusing the Jedi, whom did not know Palpatine had any close connection with Jar Jar. As the Jedi left, Sidious muttered to Commander Cody to execute Order 66. Jar Jar chuckled, much to the surprise of Palpatine. Palpatine thought he had mind-tricked and killed Jar Jar into giving him the emergency powers, but he was stunned to see dozens of clone troopers rush into the office with their blasters pointed at Sidious. As Sidious thought of his next move, Jar Jar revealed how he had used a Force Phantom to lull Sidious into believing Jar Jar was weak, but Sidious was mistaken. There could only be one true Sith Lord. Jar Jar asked the clone troopers to leave, and untying his bag, threw the heads of Grievous and Dooku into the torso of Sidious, winding the Sith Lord. The rage inside Sidious builds, and he summons his lightsabers from his cloak, whereas Jar Jar merely stood there. Sidious, with an evil smirk, attacked Jar Jar with his crimson blades. This would be his last move. As Jar Jar casually raised his hand, Sidious was stunned at his own lightsabers impaling his chest. Jar Jar proved he was the true Sith Lord. As Jedi across the galaxy fell under Order 66, Darth Jar Jar returned home, pleased with the chaos caused. That is it for this mini-series of What If Jar Jar Binks was a Sith Lord. Please like this video and subscribe for more what ifs. And as always, leave a comment on what if you'd like to see next. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.